Do you know that I've lied to protect Scientology? Welcome, everybody. I'm Natalie, and this is Scientology Life After a Cult, where we talk about Scientology and cult stuff. Now, I'm going to do a video tonight. I have a special guest. Erin's come over. Erin Smith-Levin. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Aloha.
Aloha. Good to see you. I've not seen you since you were here. Well, yeah.
Good to see you as well.
Now, this topic here, and welcome, by the way, everybody. Welcome to the chat. Welcome to the members. And thank you for the moderators for being here. When I was thinking about this, and it kind of came from a conversation that we had when you were here in Minnesota, and I was kind of looking back again at my time in Scientology and the Sea Org as a staff member, and then as a public, on how many times I lied to protect Scientology. And at first I thought, when I kind of asked myself that question, well, did I ever lie to protect Scientology? Because, you know, we're talking about just different stories within this community and other people lying to protect Scientology. I'm like, did I ever lie to protect Scientology? And I was like, I totally lied to protect Scientology. And I think it comes from a concept that I wanted to kick around with you, which in Scientology, there's this concept of the greatest good for the greatest number of dynamics, which is just different pieces of your life. The greater good, I guess, is kind of how people outside Scientology would say it.
Yeah.
Because don't you think that kind of drives it? Why, you know, if something, and I'll give you a specific situation, like when I, you know, going back even to when I got in trouble in the Sea Org and I wanted to leave the Sea Org and I went back to where I lived in the org there, I wasn't allowed to talk about certain things. And so when I was asked about it, I lied about it. I gave an acceptable truth as we're taught in Scientology, or a shore story as we're taught in the Sea Org.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So we
This
lied.
is an interesting topic. This is an interesting topic in general. And it's there's so many things that were kind of normalized to us, became normal. We're normalized in Scientology. And one of them is just constantly lying to protect the organization because of, as you said, the greatest good for the greatest number of dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
And
you know what the biggest
didn't even what's that?
Sorry, the biggest lie, I don't know about you, but for me, the thing I lied about the most, or the people I should say that I lied to the most, were other Scientologists, because I could never say, no, I actually did not like that service that I just did. Or actually, you know what happened with that person? They just locked me in a room and screamed at me like, no, everything's fine. No, oh, it went great. You know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. For me, I think it was mostly lying to non-Scientologist family members about what it was I was doing, what my daily routine was, how much freedom I had, how much time off I had, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like
what was your shore story? What was your acceptable truth? I mean, you basically were pulling an Erin Cairo. You know, you're kind of like you're living two lives, because when you were in the Sea Org, you somehow had like a house in Florida or a house somewhere, right?
In Philadelphia, I still owned a house
in Philadelphia. Like,
yeah,
there's two, I would imagine, like, you can't tell a lot of people that in the Sea Org, because they'd be like, what the heck? Or want you to refinance and give the money to the IAS.
Once my friend, I wonder if he still watches. He's out of Scientology now. Emmanuel Jamin from France. He was the Decem sec at Asha when I was there. Once he found out that I owned a property and had equity in it, oh my God, him and the IAS Regis teamed up on me. And because I was kind of like hinting to my Sea Org friends that I was going to buy a motorcycle, and like, buy a motorcycle. I'm like, yeah. Like I wasn't trying to be secretive about the fact that I owned this house or had access to funds. But once it became like, oh, he has access to funds. It
Mhm.
was like they would literally take me off post or during post time to do these reg interviews to try to get me to donate money to the IAS. And then I would, in order to get out of that, I would be like, I would sort of use my mom as an excuse and be like, no, my mom lives in the house and she's responsible for the bills. And if I pulled out this money, then it would make her life hard. And she's the senior CS of the
Oh,
org. So I
boom, boom, boom. Yeah.
can't do anything to make her life more difficult. But um, yeah, people would hit me up for like book donations, and I would always say no. But the only reason, so that was different. Like I actually wasn't trying to hide that from Sea Org members, but
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah, and that's one thing, like, with the Sea Org members when and the difference too is, like, I left the Sea Org and went on to be a Scientology public. So, I was often in a position or in conversations where I would say the majority of Scientology public that have never been on staff or never been in the Sea Org don't really fully get what it's like. Like they think that it's just this, oh, how great. You just get to work for Scientology full time. How wonderful is it to be being able to do a job where you're living out your purpose? And I would lie through my teeth about it because if I told the truth about the level of depression that I felt that I now recognize as depression, I would get in trouble for it. It would be a public relations flap, as it's called in Scientology. So I would repeatedly have to lie about these things while being security checked and interrogated. And it never came up as a lie because I was protecting Scientology. And I had it come up once in a session, in a situation where to me it was an overt because I lied to this public about a situation. And I was actually corrected on that, not by, well, I was showed, how they correct you on things. Is let me show you these references. And then working with the ethics officer person to see that it actually wasn't wrong that I lied to Scientology public, because if I'm lying to protect Scientology, that's okay. That's when I got shown the definition of shore story and acceptable truth, things that I knew. But it just felt I think when I was at that point in my life where I feel like I'm lying to Scientologists about Scientology, and I'm also, lying to public, like people not in Scientology, because I'm not being honest about what my experience really was because I was so afraid of Scientology finding out that I told somebody and what that would mean to, 3 generations of my family in Scientology.
That's interesting. Now, you said that at some point you were on some sort of a PR position. Was this in which org was that in?
So when I was in the Twin Cities, still a Scientologist before I left, the director of special affairs there, I was doing, that's when I did the pageant. I did the Mrs. Minnesota pageant, and my platform was say no to drugs, say yes to life. And I was trying to partner with the Foundation for a Drugs-Free World, which is how I found out it's a scam. I wish I'd known before, but as my own firsthand experience with them, when I'm like, hey, I want to promote the foundation, I want to help, you know, people, kids stay away from drugs. I thought it'd be a great way to do it with the pageant. And all they wanted to do was sell me the basic Scientology books. I knew I was on my own. So I did at that time, I was doing a little bit of media locally. Like I remember I went on a radio show to answer questions about Scientology. And then in my own media that I did as part of that pageant, it would come up, the Foundation for a Drug-Free World. And Scientology didn't come up a ton unless I was specifically, doing, like I said, like that radio show, or I would do an interview about it. So I would be prepped ahead of time and then debriefed afterwards. Well, actually, the director of special affairs was either sitting there or, listening to it. So they knew exactly what I was hearing. So that if the host, like he did, the host brought up how, the quote, the best way to make, a bunch of money is to start a religion, and that was credited to L. Ron Hubbard. And it was my job to basically debunk that and go, actually, that's incorrect. The actual quote came from, and I don't even remember who they said told me to say, but it was somebody else. And I said that. And I believed it because at that time I was a Scientologist. And that was the first time I'd ever heard that L. Ron Hubbard said that. It was actually through doing some press and media and public relations for Scientology that I found out what people really thought about Scientology.
That is amazing. One of the biggest examples I can think of someone publicly lying to protect Scientology
Mhm.
was actually David Miscavige when he was on Ted Koppel doing that interview with or 60
Oh,
Minutes or Nightline. I forget which one it was.
yeah.
I think it was Nightline. And they played, and this was amazing because it was on live television. They played an excerpt of an LRH lecture that almost every Scientologist who's been around for a while would have heard about L. Ron Hubbard talking about having exteriorized just casually and go to hang out in the Van Allen radiation belt and going on and on about, I don't see what the big deal is. Space can actually be really warm, and Ted Koppel, Miscavige was saying something in the interview about journalists trying to dishonestly attack L. Ron Hubbard's credibility and David Miscavige's credibility and Scientology's credibility. And Ted Koppel was like, now hold on a second. If we're talking about credibility, we need to talk about this thing that, Mr. Hubbard just said in his lecture about hanging out in the Van Allen radiation belts. Now, if you want to talk about credibility, I think he's basically destroying his own credibility. And David Miscavige was like, I've never heard that lecture before. He's like, I've never heard that before. There's so many materials from Mr. Hubbard. I don't think you understand, Ted, the millions of words and the 6,000 lectures that L. Ron Hubbard gave. He goes, he was referring to the origins of the universe there. And you're like, no, he wasn't referring to the origins of the universe. He was talking about what L. Ron Hubbard said you're supposed to be able to get from Scientology, which is the ability to leave your body at will whenever you want and go anywhere in the universe that you want. And
Right.
That would be an example where even a Scientologist would watch that and they would go, David Miscavige is lying.
Mm-hmm.
But their next thought would be, and that's totally okay, because if he would tell the truth there, it might make people think negatively of Scientology, which is funny because I think the opposite. I think if Scientology was actually honest about what they actually believe, it would be more appealing to people because I mean, that's what I think. I mean, there's a lot of people there who are attracted to that space opera stuff.
Oh, yeah, they get all the Trekkies for sure. I completely agree with you if they were, because that information too is in so many lectures and other books that have nothing to do with the upper levels. So you're already getting into spaceships, alien wars, and all of those things. You're completely right about that. I remember watching that interview when it happened. I think I was in Seattle at the time and thinking something similar at that part, like, well, wait a minute. But then immediately the mind control comes in, just like you said. And you're like, oh, but it's the greatest good. It doesn't create a public relations disaster or flap. So he was protecting Scientology by not telling the truth about it. And I think because we were indoctrinated that it's okay to lie about Scientology to protect Scientology, that you get to the point in Scientology where, especially in the Sea Org, where you're denying. I mean, and look at Mike Rinder. Mike Rinder was physically beat by David Miscavige multiple times, and he stood there. And when John Sweeney asked him on camera and said, we have reports that you have been physically assaulted by David Miscavige, and Mike Rinder looked him right in the eye, and I forget exactly what he said, but the gist is rubbish. It's not true. And he was lying to protect Scientology.
Yeah.
I think it
I
puts
wonder
more
if people think this is actually a big deal. Like, giant corporations, publicly traded companies, privately held corporations, governments, just lie all the time to protect themselves from a PR perspective. I wonder, and especially in like religious groups or cults, people are fiercely defensive of the reputation of their group and of the leaders of their group. I wonder if this is something that people even think is a big deal, or if it's just so common to groups that they're like, I don't know. Like this is probably something that's not even particularly unique to cults. even just,
Well, I think so
um,
lying about, how I don't know, the stuff that Scientologists lie about gets pretty specific, because you have to tell
true.
this short story. It's okay to not acknowledge what even like Danny Masterson did. They're it becomes so, like you said, normalized that it's no wonder it gets confusing for a Scientologist to separate out, hey, this is freaking abusive. This is abuse. This is crazy behavior, whatever it
Yeah.
is, or listening to the space opera stuff. Again, for some people, that could totally be their bag and it's fine, but you're not
Right.
allowed to question it. And I think because we had to lie to protect Scientology, that it just creates it does make it more culty, because you then even have an agreed upon short story sometimes, like when they first moved to Flag and bought the property in Clearwater and Scientology lied about who they were. I mean, that's a really big one. I'm not aware of, another mainstream religion that does that. If you're the Catholic Church and you're buying a property, you're not pretending to be this other organization, that I'm aware of. And that gets repeated over and over. And the higher you go up from public to staff member to Sea Org member, it's almost like the bigger the lies about Scientology get, because you become more aware of what Scientology really is. Whereas for public and new people, all they're seeing is what they're letting them see. And they're still believing. You got people getting people into Scientology saying things they know aren't true. But it's like, well, maybe for this guy it'll work.
Yeah.
Think it's still because it's the greater good for
Yeah.
Scientology and nobody else.
Yeah. Now that I think about it, when I was still in Scientology, still in the Sea organization, I thought of our right to control information uh, and basically bullshit people. I thought of our right to do that and the need to do that as similar to the military and state secrets.
Yeah.
I thought,
W
like,
w
of course, like, and the CIA, the FBI, the
Yeah,
CIA, the military. I
yeah,
thought of us in the same way I thought of those other organizations.
I
That
totally
like
get that.
you literally have us on one side and the enemy on the other side. And so, of course, for our own advantage or survival, we would have to exert a lot of control over information,
Yeah,
and that it would be justified in any circumstance because we're fighting a war for the survival of mankind. Like transparency, who gives a shit about that?
yeah. Your immortality depends on it. You don't wanna end up
Right.
back at the implant station. Everything is riding on Scientology, and I think that's what makes the lies culty, because you're convinced that, because again, for your example of the military or different government agencies who are protecting state secrets, and it's that's to protect people, right? In theory, it's you're protecting all of these people. You don't want to give away your next move in a war, but Scientology doesn't do anything. So, what was I lying to protect really, is kind of when I look at it now, is I was lying to protect a bunch of bullshit is what I was lying about, because it
Right.
wasn't real, even though we were made to feel that way, because I felt the same way that you did. That was, we rationalize it like, well, these other organizations lie about it, therefore we're just protecting. But looking back now, or looking at it through the eyes of people never in Scientology, what are you protecting? But we didn't know
That's
that.
that's what it really comes down to is like, yeah, but what are you protecting? Uh, and when you look at like, okay, here's an aspect of lying that other organizations do not do, other corporations do not do, but maybe the military, the CIA, the FBI, the CIA would do that kind of stuff, is the lies that Scientology tells about former members to discredit them with current members.
Oh god, yeah.
Mike Rinder is a wife beater. Mark Headley embezzled funds.
Mhm.
Pat Broker stole $1.8 million of L. Ron Hubbard's money. Like that's just Scientology literally just making up lies about people
Mhm.
because it thinks it needs to protect itself. I don't see other religious organizations doing that. I
Yeah.
mean,
People just kind of leave.
yeah, like if an executive of Apple leaves, they're not like, he beats his children.
He has crimes against humanity.
Yeah.
But they have to do that because you can't leave Scientology. Scientology cannot let us or anyone leave without criminalizing us. They have to. Because L. Ron Hubbard said over and over again that if you're critical of Scientology, you have crimes that you could be arrested for. And it's their job to figure out what those crimes are. And being that they don't find them the vast majority of the time, then they just make them up. They have to just make it up because they have to prove L. Ron Hubbard to be right. When I was working for my, the local org, like volunteering and doing public relations stuff with the director of special affairs there, it was the other side of OSA. It was, you have the investigation side, and then you have the public relations side. And you never know, you know what I'm saying? Like those two, I don't think they really talk. And it was like that even at a smaller organization like that. And so afterwards is like you find out what really was a red flag for me is after I'd done a few of these interviews, and then he would question me like, oh, okay, so do you do understand that the truth about that statement? And then he would, show me the reference. I would go right back into reprogramming. So I would sit down, do an interview for Scientology, lie about it, some of it unknowingly, because that's what I believe to be true, and then, get this whole handling to make sure that I didn't have any bad indicators, that I didn't have questions. And I learned real quick not to have questions. Just be like, oh, no, of course. I mean, that's so BS. That's so BS. And inside, I'm thinking, oh my God, did that happen?
Yeah. Yeah. You asked me earlier, like the lying to the family members. And
Yeah.
thankfully, we're talking about years where I was, pretty much a child. And my contact with the non-Scientologists' family members was very, very minimal. And I remember being like thankful. Like, I remember not regretting at all that my contact with my non-Scientologist family members was so minimal, because I actually had a lot of anxiety around how to talk about my Scientology experience and just the anxiety of having to kind of lie about it.
Yeah.
And it was easier for me, more comfortable for me to just not have to have anything to do with those family members than it was to spend a lot. In my mind, I'm thinking the more time I spend around these people, the more I have to talk about this thing that I don't really want to have to talk about because I can't just be honest about it.
Yeah. Do you recall like what you had to say? Were these things that you had to come up with on your own, or did they brief you on it? Because sometimes you get handled ahead of time. Like when I was working on getting Shelby out of Flag and they got wind that I was disaffected, I was starting to pull away. I had already full blown decided to leave. They just didn't know that. They were prepping her with, your mom's probably going to say this and your mom is doing that. And they showed her reports that were written on me of my out ethics, because my husband and I at the time, instead of going to an org event, we went to dinner. We went and had a date. And, and I like that was just this horrible thing. And my mother, her grandmother, who was also leaving Scientology, had gotten baptized in a Christian church, and that was a huge flap. So they ahead of time prepped her, and she wasn't to talk about anything that happened at Flag. I did not know what happened to Shelby, the degree to which she was mistreated and abused, until she decided to leave Scientology, because I took her and sent her out of the country so that I could deal with Scientology and get them to back off. And then, because she had turned 18, they would have sent her anywhere to keep her away from me. And it wasn't until she kind of really chilled out and, because at first, I mean, I shared this with you, she didn't want to leave. And I was ruining her life and Christmas. But eventually she came around and she got to see when I showed her, I asked her about, I said, I want you to, the Declaration of Human Rights. because I did know a few things that she had mentioned, but she didn't see it as an out point, like being made to stay up and cleaning the bathroom because she didn't make a sales quota. To her, it wasn't an out point. She's like, well, yeah, of course I had to, go clean the bathroom and put in all this extra time because I didn't make my quota. That's like, what? Who, at what job? And it wasn't even a job. Or in what church? You don't make your sales quota, you got to go clean a bathroom. Like what in the world?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure the manager of the Apple store, if they don't sell enough iPads that week, isn't having to go scrub the dumpster with a
Yeah.
toothbrush. But again, like you said, it gets normalized.
Yeah.
How were you able to what's just a few examples of how you were able to successfully get her out? Because that's one of the hardest things to do.
Well, one, mainly I the way that I got her out was without her knowing I was getting her out. She was on training in Florida at Flag, and I was in Minnesota having decided to leave. And by then I knew my husband would leave and I knew my mother would leave and some other family members. It was her. But I couldn't tell her that because she was literally in the belly of the beast. So my ex-husband, her dad, planned a trip to Mexico for Christmas to take her. And then I had another family member pick her up. So she thought she was going on this trip to Mexico, but she thought she was flying back to Flag and returning, which is also what Flag thought. And at the last minute, she was supposed to be picked up the next day to fly out. She basically got handled to not go. And she called me and I could hear it in her voice how upset she was. And I also knew that I could hear it in her voice that somebody was listening. And she basically, through tears, told me how it was the right thing to stay and not go. And so I just said, well, I'm like, oh, I get it. I get it, Shelby. Oh, it's going to be so hard to handle your dad, though, because by then Dan had been out for such a long time. He could be the scapegoat. And so I talked to him and we planned this whole thing ahead of time. I'm like, look, we got a good cop, bad cop this thing to get her out. So I'm going to throw you under the bus as being the a-hole. And I'm going to be the Scientologist who's trying to handle you. So I'm like, well, let me see what I can do. I'll call your dad. I don't know, Shelby. I mean, he's already paid for everything and all that, but I get it. So let me see. So I called Dan and I'm basically like, here's the number to call. You call and threaten to show up and get her anyways. You paid for this. You just go off about it. He's like, okay, okay. So he does. And they pretty much kind of at that point are like, well, we're going to let her go. So she gets told she can go. What she didn't know is I had sent her a fake itinerary. So I sent her an itinerary showing that she was coming back to Clearwater, where in reality, it was a one-way ticket. And then I had a family member pick her up and gave her a cell phone for Christmas, but that way they couldn't reach her on her old phone. And so I physically had her. Once I physically had her, I started talking to her about, hey, Dad and I have like learned a lot of things about Scientology and what's happening at the, upper management with David Miscavige, because by then the Tampa Bay Times stuff had come out and, Mike Rinder had come out and shared all this stuff. And so I started sharing it with her in the car on the ride home from the airport because she flew to Minnesota for 2 days and then was going to Mexico. Not even 2 days. It was 1 day. So I had like a day with her to just kind of try to get through and then send her to Dan, and at least she'd be out of the country. And so when I did that and said that, she just was completely stone faced. And I could tell like, oh, they prepped her. She's not that surprised by this. So I was just like, okay, this is going to take some doing. And, I let her come home and I went down and I talked to her a little bit more, but I really tried to work on my communication with her because I already knew she was upset because she knew we were disaffected and this was huge. So she went to Mexico and while she was there, she slept. She ate well. And she started kind of like getting her human senses back in a way. So by the time she came back to Minnesota, and we'd had a few conversations while she was in Mexico and I was in close contact with her dad. We had more conversations. And by then, because a staff member in Twin Cities, who now, as far as I know, joined the Sea Org and went to work for the Office of Special Affairs. So, hey there, Karen Wessling. She tried to reach Shelby in Mexico and convince her to move out of my house and move in with her so she could stay a staff member because Shelby was 18. Well, that left me only one choice in my little tool book because I was like, okay, my two belt. Let's see, what do I know about Scientology? I need to disqualify her for being allowed back at Flag. Okay, how can I disqualify her? I'm like, okay, I'll threaten to sue the church. Boom, done. So I sent a letter, certified mail, threatened to sell. I think I threatened to sue David Miscavige, Scientology, and RTC if they don't back off from my daughter. So I sent that certified. And then I think I sent it 2 ways just in case, just to be sure. It was a lot of postage. I remember that. And Shelby comes back from Mexico and she's like, well, the ethics officer at Flag won't return my calls. Nobody's calling me back. And I'm like, oh, I think you've been disqualified to be on the base. And she's like, what did you do? I'm like, I'm taking care of this family. That's what I did. And she was pissed. It was probably 3 weeks. And she said, I'm going back. And I'm like, okay, well, you're going to need to get a job because I am not paying for that. You can't drive because you don't have a car. And I'm not giving you one dime while you're there, which I did give her money to, so she could be comfortable while she was there. And she was mad, but in the course of that time, so she immediately got a job from my brother-in-law who knew what was going on. And she eventually, the food and the rest was huge because she was so jacked up. I took her to a couple doctors. She had these varicose veins, and one of the doctors said, I've never seen it in somebody so young. What's
Wow.
been happening? And I was like, oh, she's been on her feet for like 100 hours a week because she was training to be a course supervisor. So what did they do?
Mhm.
They used her to supervise the kids' course room at Flag
Hmm.
7 days a week, even though that's not even what she was there for. She was there to train. So
Wow.
what ultimately did it, and I know it's taking me forever to answer this question, what ultimately did it is when I got out of her more of what was happening at Flag when she was there. So she was starting to share the truth about what happened, not the shore story she told me earlier. And I got the Declaration of Human Rights that Scientology uses. And I said, with what you just told me, I want you to hold that in your mind and tell me how that lines up next to this Declaration of Human Rights that Scientology uses. And I started reading them off to her, and I could just see it on her face that
Hmm.
she was connecting the dots. Like, well, oh, well, wait. I mean, the confusion. And enough of that, she came around and then realized that Scientology was a human trafficking cult, and she needed to not go back. And she went to college, she got a degree, she's now married and has a daughter and owns her own home. She's got a master's degree and
Hmm.
she's doing great. But ultimately, it was I physically needed to medically take care of her and then go in with the, where I felt her reality was, human
Wow.
rights were really important to her.
Wow. I would love to do a chat with Shelby on my channel sometime. How many have you done with her?
I've done 2, but I did them in the early days. I think we did them in December, January, but you should because you'll have a whole nother set of questions and way of looking at it that as her mom, would just be different. I know she'd do it. You should totally do it
Yeah.
because her
That
story
would be
is
a lot of
really
fun.
interesting. Being a, third generation Scientologist, but also on the training program in Clearwater, because she would talk about
Yeah.
how they would get locked down if there were protesters. And they were told the protesters were physically violent.
That's an example of a good lie to protect Scientology.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But we don't have to lie anymore.
Yeah.
And that is what I think they cannot stand. But you should have her on. That would be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, we kind of wrapped it up there. I think the whole point being I have told way many more lies than you to protect Scientology.
I mean, I was always sort of fortunate that I was not really on what they would call forward-facing lines or public-facing lines. Meaning, and in this case, public means non-Scientologist public.
Yeah.
Um, you know, so really, the people I was having to lie to was my non-Scientologist family members, but I never had to speak to the press. I
Yeah.
never had to testify in court. I never had to do any of that stuff. So,
Hey, did you ever go
but
back
and
and tell them the truth?
tell, oh,
Do they know?
my
Do they
dad.
watch your
Well,
channel?
oh yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow, that's
yeah,
cool. That's really
yeah, yeah.
cool.
It's much more fun to tell the truth.
Yeah. And I remember too, you talked about this before, you were such a young age, and having to, wanting to go see your dad and them interfering with that, like, and wanting you to handle your dad. And just in what world like that, when I was in Scientology at that age, my mom was super gung ho in it. And so I've always been curious about, like, with that experience where you have one parent who's not, and what do you say?
Yeah. Well, I mean, fortunately for me, my dad never tried to put negativity on me or my brother as far as Scientology. And I say fortunately because it would have made the relationship worse, and it probably would have put me in a tougher spot on the Scientology side of things. He was always very respectful, but also it created a certain distance between us. It created a sort of lack of intimacy in our relationship because he didn't really want to pry. He didn't really want to create problems. He didn't really want to drive a wedge between, us and our mom, for example. And so he was always very respectful about it. But, after I left Scientology, it's one of the things that he said to me is, like, look, like it's one of the reasons I've sort of kept my distance is not the words that he used, but not tried to be more of a presence because he was aware that it would just create problems and he was just going to kind of let it be. But he did express a lot of regret for just those having been the circumstances. I wish I had been more of a presence in your life, but this for me was the reason, what was going through my head and my reasons for keeping the distance. I mean, because really there was a whole segment of my life where, we're only seeing him once a year. And then for years and years, we just weren't even visiting him for a lot of the time that I was at Flag. And then later when I was back on post in Philadelphia. And, we talk on the phone 3 or 4 times a year at most, but one of the reasons he didn't try to have it be more than that was because of Scientology.
Wow. I'm so glad that he told you that. At the same time, it's like it's the truth, but it's like your dad just continued to be there and he knew the boundaries that he had to dance around if he wanted to maintain a relationship with you.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And if he had tried harder, quote unquote, it actually would have hurt our relationship. And it's better that he didn't. And that's actually the advice that I give people who contact me. I've got family members in Scientology. What should I say? What can I do to try to get them out? And I'll be like, it's like, I go, are you willing to ruin the relationship? Or would you rather be the person that when the time comes that they want to leave, you're the safe person for them to go to? And I think in most circumstances, it's actually better to just be a non-threatening presence in their lives so that when the time comes, you are at the top of the list of people they will go to for help.
Ah, yeah, that's so true. I've said that too. I completely agree with you on that. And it's not easy to do. I mean, I give your dad a lot of credit for that. That can't be easy to you do. And for these parents who have, whether they're, like in your situation where you share custody or even you have an adult child that goes into the Sea Org and they play along. I had friends like that and a couple family members on my dad's side where I didn't find out till I left Scientology exactly what they thought about it. And
Right.
they were doing the same thing.
Yeah.
God,
Yeah.
it's so much. We just like put the people who care about us. It's like through so much. Scientology, people not in Scientology are negatively affected by Scientology.
It's
You
true.
think about it, it's not just people in it. Oh, gosh. Well, let's see. Should we grab some questions?
Yeah.
All right, let's see. Well, Kitty says, I'm so happy to see Natalie and AA Run get together because it means a whole lot of laughs and love. Thanks, Kitty. That's so sweet. Does it matter to you? Not to me. Thank you both for peeling the onion. Respect to both of you. Thank you for that. Corn Freaks asking, Natalie, did your children go to public school? They did. They did. They, for a hot minute, went to a Scientology school. It was so expensive. So I want to say it was for like maybe like 1 year, I think that Shelby went, which it might have been kindergarten. And then they went to regular public school and then to a Montessori school, which was a charter school, so still a public school, but different. Your kids, Aaron, right, went to public school? Well, obviously not Scientology school, but
I think for like 1 or 2 years, they went to one of the local Scientology private schools called Washburn Academy. But it was when they were so young that it didn't really matter. Like they were just, it was essentially daycare practically. What, I don't know, was it the 2nd grade? I can't remember exactly. But yeah, but then they started going to local non-Scientology affiliated charter schools, public charter schools. Charter schools are all public schools, but
yeah.
and yeah, so they never actually had exposure to Scientology, even when they were going to Washburn Academy. Thankfully.
Yeah, thankfully. Kelsey has a question, follow-up clarification. I understand the implant station, but if you are so powerful after going clear, how is this a problem?
Well, technically, Scientologists think that after going clear, it's probably not a problem. You're probably in the clear. You're probably spiritually aware enough to bypass the implant station and remember your past life when you come back next time. But there's no, it's not like L. Ron Hubbard says, when you go clear, you will be able to bypass the implant station. He never says at what point you're in good enough shape to skip the implant station when you die. So it's just kind of always a lingering question for a lot of Scientologists are, am I in good enough K shape? Do I have too many overts? Have I gone past too many misunderstood words?
Can I avoid the implant station? I never even thought to ask that. Can you imagine? I wonder if their response would be if you walk in, you're doing a director of processing interview and you're like, I just need to know, what do I have to do to avoid the implant station?
How fun would it be for protesters to ask Scientologists that question? Have you had enough auditing to bypass the implant station? Are you in good enough K shape to bypass the between lives implant station? I mean, a Scientologist would be like, what? What are you studying? Where are you getting this information?
That's right. They lose their mind. Jessica,
where are you out on the bridge?
Where are you on the bridge?
Are you high enough on the bridge to avoid the between lives implant station?
Jessica should make one. They should make an implant station in LA. It's part of the protest. Like, we brought the implant station to you. See if you can shatter it.
I've always wanted to open up a bar and have it be called like the org, and like have the drinks be different levels of the bridge, like the L10, the L11, but it would be funny to open up a bar and call it the implant station.
Yeah, the implant station. Or maybe a hotel, a boutique hotel, the implant station. You can check in and out, but with a whole bunch of ideas that you did not come in with. Because, right, wasn't that the whole implant station? Is you're implanted with like Jesus and religion and all of these things that we're supposed to do here on earth?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. These false, that's right. Yeah. I mean, mainly you're implanted to go shoot down into a body and then to report back automatically when you die. That was always my understanding. Go to the light. Go to the light. You're drawn to the light because you've been implanted to do that. But then also your implant is to forget your previous lives. And you're supposed to be implanted with something that is supposed to make you more susceptible to believe or to join some of the world's major religions, so that you believe in a heaven or a hell, and you have no desire to find out that Earth is just a prison planet, that you only live one, that to believe that you only live one lifetime, and that Earth is all there is, and there's no life anywhere else in the universe. Because that's one of the things that the world's major religions believe, that if you believe that, then you're not going to be trying to find out who the fifth invader force is.
It's another one they should ask at protests. Have you figured out who the fifth invader force is? Are they still coming?
That's right. When is the fifth invader force due to return? That would be a good question for the protesters to ask.
Oh my God, it would. We should dress up as at Halloween. I will come out to Clearwater. Let's dress up as the fifth invader force and show up at flag.
We're back. We're here. You've all failed. The fifth invader force has returned.
We showed up, not L. Ron Hubbard. Kelsey's question is, why do Scientologists want to save mankind if they are the ultimate thetans and didn't need physical bodies? Ooh, that's a good one for you.
Well, when they say save mankind, they really mean wake everyone up. That we're all, what was the wording of the question again?
Want to save mankind.
Oh, they are the ultimate thetans. Well, because Scientologists believe really that we are all the ultimate thetans. Mm-hmm. And with enough Scientology, we can regain our native state of basically being the ultimate thetans. I guess the problem with this question is it's not true that there are ultimate thetans, but it's that we are all natively godlike, and the role of Scientology is to free everyone on this planet from the prison planet and from the birth, the cycle of birth to death, where we believe we are our bodies and we have amnesia of our previous lives. They're basically trying to unplug everyone from the matrix. And that is what they mean by save mankind. They mean through enough Scientology auditing, unplug enough people from the matrix, i.e. the prison planet that is Earth, that I mean, it's basically like fighting a spiritual war against the evil psychiatrists that are imprisoning us here. So that's what they're trying to do. And that's what they mean when they say save the planet, clear the planet, save the planet.
Yeah, that is very true. I think a lot of people get into Scientology or even join staff because they have this desire. Like, they're the same people who might have joined some other, the Peace Corps, or some gone into the military, or just done something that they felt was more beyond just themselves. And Scientology takes that and then just directs it towards the will of Scientology. Like, they exploit the goodwill that people have, because I think a lot of people want to help a bunch of people if you think you can save them. And because in Scientology, the belief is reincarnation, it's like, well, you could have been my son in a past life. It's just, so we're all connected to each other, which is not a bad idea. But somehow that all goes away the higher you go up in Scientology, because you're not allowed to be an individual unless you're a celebrity.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Indigo Twin question comment. How do they approach that with kids? Are kids just thetans who choose that baby? This concept always confuses me.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, kids, Scientologists think that kids are just young bodies, but the thetan, like if you have a 1-year-old baby, a Scientologist would think that, 1 year ago and 1 day, that thetan was probably in an 80-year-old body, and the body died and they shot over the implant station. Because remember, thetans don't exist in space or time. Like, all this is occurring potentially instantly. And it's confusing, right? Because the implant station has to exist in space and time. And so in order for the thetan to be able to be the effect of the implant station, the thetan has to already have decided to position itself in space and time. But it's not like it takes 3 days to travel to the implant station, is what I'm saying. It could take the blink of an eye. So the thetan drops the body, goes over to the implant station, shoots instantly into a new body. Like, you could literally, like, within minutes, drop your body, go to the implant station, and pick up a new body. And that's so the question is, how do they approach this with kids? Are kids just thetans who chose that baby? Exactly. But honestly, at that level, Scientologists would say that they didn't even pick that body. They were just programmed to shoot into the body. It wasn't even a choice. It was unknowing. It was unconscious, subconscious.
And if you do Scientology and you move up the levels, you become more able, more like I know for me, my idea and part of what I saw as something I wanted to achieve was being able to choose what happens after I die, be able to choose my family. And that was the idea that I had growing up, that if you got far enough that you could do that. And I know you had mentioned too before, like it was like OT 9 and 10, right? So maybe at that level you can avoid the implant station.
No, I mean, even the fact that there are Scientologists who, oh, well, they used to be allowed to attest to having achieved the state of clear in a previous life, um, sort of illustrates that Scientologists believe that if you achieve the state of clear, you are very likely to be able to come back next lifetime and be born into a Scientology family, sort of causatively, and or at least come back and find Scientology as soon as you're old enough to do so. And that's been happening. Scientologists claim that's been happening since the early years of Scientology. That really, I mean, that is the goal. That is their goal, is to be spiritually aware and causative enough to avoid the implant station and reincarnate and come back and have a leg up on everyone else because you've retained the abilities that you gained from Scientology in your previous life.
That's right. But they can't say that. Or go in Scientology is to avoid the implant station. Can you imagine if you told your neighbors?
I think they'd have more success in recruiting people if they just said that stuff.
If they were just outright with it. Oh, sometimes I just wish I could go back and just ask all of the questions that I actually would, just to get a reaction out of them, just to see what they'd actually say. I'd like have a whole list of them. I should ask Nora, since she was a word clearer, like, how would you handle this one? Oh, actually, I would love to do that.
Hey, let's tell everyone, if you're watching live right now, hit that like button.
Yes, and subscribe.
Yeah.
Let's see. Last question. Anne says, question for Aaron. Did you feel you needed to forgive your dad for his absence, or it wasn't an issue for you?
Wasn't an issue for me.
I totally get that. I've gotten a similar question about my mom, and I never one time felt like upset or animosity. I mean, it was the opposite. She got me into Scientology. But
yeah. Oh, I guess I should explain. I mean, it's not my dad who moved away from us. Like,
yeah,
I was born in Montana. My mom grew up in Iowa. I think my dad grew up in Washington. But like, my mom is the one who took us and moved to the East Coast. Like, so for my childhood, I was living on the East Coast. Me and my brother and my mom were living on the East Coast. My dad lived in Minneapolis for my whole childhood. So we would go and visit him for, a couple weeks every summer, starting from maybe like 4 or 5 years old. I remember we were really young. We were like flying by ourselves in the airplanes and getting to see the cockpit and getting the little wings, So we would go and visit our dad every summer. And then when we joined staff, I think for a year or two, we continued to visit him in the summers, but then that pretty much stopped. So it's not like my dad's fault that he wasn't more of a presence in our lives. Like, it's really our mom who moved away. And so, yeah, there was no hard feelings ever. I mean, my dad was a great dad. He was as great of a dad as he could have been given the circumstances. Like, we did not have a bad relationship. We just didn't have more of a relationship than we had.
Yeah. I still think that's so beautiful what he did. I'm still thinking about it, just knowing that I have to maintain these boundaries to have this relationship. I mean, it's kind of what we all we do to a degree with each other. But that's just as a parent, because I remember what that felt like, not having my child there because of Scientology. And props to your dad, Aaron's dad.
He's a great guy. He really is.
All right. I think those are pretty much the questions that we're getting to. You got anything else to add to this? Or are you ready to wrap it up?
I think we can wrap it up. I'm just seeing some people in the chat want to say hi to. Hi, Windy City. Good to see you. Always good to see you in here. Yeah, I guess, seeing a whole lot of regulars. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. And yeah, it's been a fun little chat. We managed to kill almost an hour. I can't believe it.
I know, I know. And well, we both had a busy day today. I was watching your video earlier, trying to get all caught up, but this is my third one today. I'm catching up because I had to reschedule a bunch of things. So, and there's just so much.
So, did you see the only video that I've done today is Scientology just plunked down another $30 million to buy a Spanish language TV channel in Los Angeles, like crazy.
I know. I was like, well, don't they already have the other studio, the whole Scientology TV? So is this their solution to reach more Spanish speaking people? Are they going to keep it that way?
Yes, if so from what I can understand, they're not buying a TV studio, they're buying the TV channel.
Yeah.
And so it's a purely Spanish language TV channel. So they are clearly investing $30 million to try and reach the Spanish population. Now it's funny because they already have orgs in Mexico. They have like five orgs in Mexico. They've got orgs in South America, but they are targeting the Spanish language Los Angeles community. I mean, that's a ton of money to spend in hopes of reaching that community. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's money they're flushing right down the drain. So,
You think
yeah,
that it's I mean, because they only have to be getting people who are from other places. And but they're trying to reach people now locally, but only, mostly like you said, concentrated in the Spanish community. Do you think that ooh, there goes my dog. Some dog walking by that didn't pay the toll. He's like, this is not the routine. You're never in here at this time of night.
here's one of my guesses here, Natalie. I think that David Miscavige is probably counting on the fact that things like the Going Clear documentary, things like the Aftermath show, I don't know if these things are translated into Spanish and available in the Spanish community. I'm guessing that he is counting on the fact that a lot of the true information about Scientology has been less accessible or less widely distributed in the Spanish-speaking community than the English-speaking community, and therefore they might succeed in tricking Spanish people more easily into joining Scientology than English-speaking people. Like that's kind of the only way I can wrap my mind around why they're even bothering. But yeah, I don't know.
It's a
What do you
lot.
think?
I think too. I'm with you. I don't see how that's going to work. But then again, most things that they do just don't make any sense. But I was just
Yeah.
thinking, is it locally only? Like what's the reach of the station? Do you know?
It's a Los Angeles-based station.
Mhm.
So
So the
I
audience is Los Angeles.
I think so. I think
Sure.
so. Oh, but there's another thing. Oh, it also look, there's one giant hole in the SPTV community, and that is a Spanish-speaking channel.
Yeah. That is very true.
If someone had an exclusively Spanish-speaking SPTV channel, they would have the entire market to themselves. And I think Spanish YouTube is huge.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great idea.
You'd never run out of content because honestly, if somebody wanted to do an exclusively Spanish language channel, they could just literally recycle
Mhm.
all of the stuff we are all already doing and just do it in Spanish.
Mhm.
They could literally be like, what videos did Aaron do today? Let me just recover the exact same ground, but do it in Spanish.
Yeah. Yeah, pick and choose, and then be able to tailor it more to fit even just, stories from those areas too, stories from that community that they
Yeah.
could relate to more because how many people I wonder are out there that are Spanish speaking and even other languages where the language is actually the barrier to be able to
I
share
see.
their story.
Is Abraham Orich our Abraham of Sins of Scientology, Abraham?
Yep.
Do you know?
Yep.
He says, I speak Spanish. There you go, Abraham. I,
Oh,
I
and
I have
Juanita
I
in
have
Chicago.
I have a friend who I already believe is eventually, when they're ready to go public, willing and able to tackle. Well, he's Spanish. He's Spanish speaking as his first language. But I got to tell you, it's a huge untapped market. Somebody ought to tackle it.
Yeah. And Abraham, I think you should cue that up. And Juanita, she protests in Chicago. She doesn't do a lot of streaming, but that would be a great idea. I agree. That's true. Now, this is interesting. Nerman says targeting Spanish for the vote in the 2024 election. If that's what maybe Scientology is doing by buying the station. I
don't
can't
know.
imagine they're going to put out ads, though, that are like that have to do with, politics. Hey, question. In your day, did you guys vote? In my day, I don't remember ever voting.
The years that I was in the Sea Org was from the ages of 22 to 26. I don't remember ever being encouraged to vote. Nobody cared.
Mhm. Yeah. That's
Now, I
true.
believe it is a little different these days. I believe they are I believe for whatever reason they are encouraging Sea Org members to vote, but I'm not sure why. I don't know why they care.
Yeah, I could see it locally, but like in Clearwater for that election, were there Sea Org members that went out and voted?
Oh, in Clearwater, 100% of the registered Scientology voters voted in the local election. But that was because you had either me or Mark Bunker running for office. And by the way, I was able to verify those numbers because I had access to all the rolls. Because when you're running for office, there's special apps and special websites and platforms where you have access to all the voter registration data because you have to know what doors to knock on and all this kind of stuff. So I was able to run spreadsheets, and I still have these spreadsheets of every registered voter at every Scientology address. So now, of course, that's going to give me Sea Org members. That's not going to give me all Scientologists.
Yeah.
But I can tell you this, 100% of the Sea Org members who were registered to vote voted. And I would run into them when I was going to the polling stations on election day.
How did that go?
I mean, I wasn't trying to instigate anything, but,
Yeah.
I saw them. They saw me.
They weren't there to vote for you, I'm assuming.
Nah.
Someone pointed out too, that's right, Serge speaks Spanish, but he does his channel in English. But that'd be a great idea too. I wonder if he could do some of them in Spanish.
Yeah, I think in order for it to truly be successful, it would have to be a dedicated Spanish language channel. So if Serge just tried to do Spanish videos on his English channel, I think the channel itself might suffer. So it's work. I mean, if he might want to experiment on that, but whoever wants to really tackle this should plan on doing an exclusively Spanish language channel.
Yeah, I love that idea. I love it. And then Chinese, that's the next one I think we're going to need because think about how many people from Taiwan are in Australia. I mean, when you talk to people from there, you hear about especially a lot of the trafficking cases there were from being brought over from Asia to Australia.
Oh yeah, a Taiwanese channel would be successful, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Well,
now Scientology, I mean, only exists in Taiwan. It's illegal in mainland China. But yeah,
I did not know that.
Oh yeah, there's no Scientology presence in mainland China.
That's why.
And also a Japan. That's why. That's the reason. Because I mean, technically, like if you're Chinese, you consider Taiwan to be part of China. If you're Taiwanese, you consider that you are actually the Taiwanese government doesn't just think of itself as the government of Taiwan. They think of themselves as the rightful government of all of China. And that's why it's so controversial in American politics to recognize or to recognize Taiwan as its own country. It's why Top Gun had to remove the Taiwan flag from Maverick's jacket, because that recognizes Taiwan as being a separate country. But China does not consider Taiwan to be a separate country. It just considers Taiwan to be an island that is part of China, right? What the hell was I? Why was I talking about all that?
Oh, because there's the Taiwanese station or channel.
That's right. So there's no Scientology presence whatsoever in mainland China. It's only in Taiwan. You know what else would be valuable? A Japanese channel.
Yes. They got Tokyo Org. How many more? Where do they go to train from Japan?
Sydney, Australia.
Okay. So they'd be there too with the Taiwanese then.
Well, when you say where do they go to train, they train they train
Japan, but like so here in the US we got like you can go to Flag or you can go to ASHO, and I know that I remember seeing a lot of people at Flag and even in LA from those different countries. And I always wondered, was one, I mean, because where would they go? And in Hawaii, growing up in Hawaii, we would have Scientologists who were either vacationing from Japan and would sometimes come into or very, very, very few. But when
Mm,
Australia came all the time, the
mm.
Anzo people came to Hawaii to recruit. In fact, my first Sea Org contract for a billion years, I signed with some guy from Australia. I like his
Wow.
accent.
Yeah. Well, if you're in Japan or Taiwan and you're going to do your briefing course or your OT levels, you're going to go to Sydney, Australia. Or if you want to spend extra money, you're going to go to Flag.
Yeah, yeah,
But
probably
Sydney,
less.
Australia is what makes sense.
Yeah, per Scientology Audit says ASHO Anzo covers Australia, New Zealand,
Well,
Pacific, and all
uh,
of Asia.
yeah, it's actually called AOSH ANZO, but ASHO is just the name of the organization on L. Ron Hubbard Way. But yeah, AOSH ANZO is supposed to cover all that region. But it's funny that some of them end up going to Flag anyway. I don't know. It must be a clout thing. Oh, you know what? It's because of the Flag World Tour. The
Yeah.
Flag World Tour swoops in and hoovers people up to go to Flag, even though they really shouldn't have to.
They go in and they grab all the people who have bad indicators. Because I remember when I was public, that was the whole thing. And I was the advanced person for a Flag tour. It wasn't the Flag World Tour, but
Hmm.
it was when I worked for Barbara. Do you ever know Barbara Dews? She was a Flag service consultant in Orange County, Sea Org
No.
member. But this is when like Flag for a while had offices. They were taking Sea Org members who were having children and being sent out, and they were
Mm.
putting them in Flag service consultant offices in these class 5 orgs. So when I went to Seattle, I was actually part of the Flag service consultant org network, whatever you call it. So
Mhm.
I was going and setting up and doing events all over the place for Flag. Then these two guys who were OT8 would come and then do these events and then, reg all this money for Flag. And it was always kind of oh, bring us your people who are not, or who aren't winning. Are you having a hard time? Are you having a
Yeah.
difficult time? We can handle it. And it gave false hope to so many people.
Even at ASHO, we would go and do the same thing, go out to the orgs and try to scoop up all their public who were somehow dissatisfied. It's like the fact that these orgs have to deal with so many other echelons and entities coming into their area and trying to steal public is one of the things that makes working in an org an absolute nightmare. Everyone's fighting over the same people.
It's cannibalistic. I mean, it really is.
Yeah.
But you're right. I remember that in Hawaii, they'd come out and then the Hawaii would be upset or have beef because then it's like, oh, well, now you're taking all of our public. But you can't say too much about it because, you can't punch up.
That's
Not
right.
in Scientology.
That is right.
All right, let's see here. I don't think I have any more starred things. I don't think that Nancy starred. But and saying, yeah, Aaron, it's all about the money. Go to Flag, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Let's see. I don't think if there's anything else there you want to answer. Otherwise, shall we call it a night?
Let's call it a night.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And as usual, I hope you all have an amazing cult free evening.